Hello, good evening and welcome to Arling Cardiff and our session this evening on liberating emotions. This is the third and final of the three sessions. I'm Ngakpa ö-Dzin and this is Ngakpa ö-Dzin. And Ngakpa ö-Dzin is the main teacher for this set of teachings. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at any time, either by using the raise your hand function on the Zoom window. You just go to participants at the bottom and it'll offer you raise your hand, or you can write your question in the chat box and I will interrupt Ngakpa at an appropriate moment. So thank you, and I will pass over to Ngakpa ö-Dzin.
Thank you very much. As Ngakpa ö-Dzin said, this is the third and final of the three teachings on liberating emotions. The month has flown by. As it's the third, and maybe not everyone has been here for all of it, I thought a quick recap on what we covered in the first two teachings before we go on with today's teaching. Mainly, the main point of the first teaching was that it was about non-duality. We act as if form were different from emptiness, and we're surprised when it isn't. And we act as if there's a permanent real me, and we're surprised when there isn't. If we understood that form and emptiness were non-dual, and that this idea of me is this momentary, transitory event, then we wouldn't have any emotional problems. We'd just be present with what is. And then from that particular understanding, all sorts of different teachings can be given to help us gain that understanding, all sorts of different teachings and practices. And as this is a series of teachings on the emotions, we looked last time at the color and element symbolism from Tantric psychology. And this basically categorizes our emotional reactions to situations into 5 different views, the views of earth, water, fire, air, and space, and looks at how each of those approaches, if we have that particular neurosis, undermines itself in whatever we're trying to do, but also contains within it its own liberation. And liberation is always possible. So, as Ngakpa said, questions at any time, and if anyone's got any questions on what's gone before, now might be a good time for them. Otherwise, I will carry on with with today's material.
No questions, sir.
Okay. One of the things that I was always on the lookout for, or trying to concoct, was a situation that people of every style of neurosis could participate in and see how they approach the same situation differently. And the thesis behind this is that the emotional neurosis is within us, not within the situation. So we all have these elemental neuroses at work, and we all have all of them, but in each one of us there may be one or more that are more dominant. And we react to situations in terms of that neurotic function. So even given the same situation, people will react differently. And I hope that bears out the idea that we take full responsibility for how we react to things, because it's happening within us rather than happening out there. So something has happened over the past year or so to give me my desired scenario. And I'm sorry about this, because what's happened is this virus that seems to be everywhere and also seemed to arrive everywhere quite suddenly, with very little time for people to prepare for it. So we gain our instantaneous reactions to that situation. And so what I've concocted, and it's a bit of a caricature, are what I call pandemic pictures or virus vignettes of how people of the different elemental styles might react.
It's not a question you need.
So we have the elemental neuroses associated with earth, water, fire, air, and space. And this just gives us a way of looking at how we are in these different situations. So I have lumpily classified people into hoarders, vigilantes, anti-lockdown people, conspiracy theorists, and the ultimately confused and depressed. So the reaction of somebody who has a particular earth neurosis to the pandemic is one of hoarding, because the earth neurosis, as you know, is to do with that feeling of poverty in the face of circumstances, whatever they are, in the face of these unusual circumstances, which start to literally pull the ground out from under us. A person whose particular approach to life leads them to a sense of poverty will be one of those people who needs to hoard. So at the first sign of potential disruption to supplies, these are the people who are down at the supermarket, and traditionally in Britain at least, buying bread and toilet rolls. And because of the fear of lack of bread and toilet rolls, people will queue up for hours, fill their trolleys and their cars with bread and toilet rolls, and instantly you have a lack of bread and toilet rolls in the shop. So they're absolutely right, there's a lack of bread and toilet rolls. And the addition, I suppose, to, because of the pandemic, at the outset at least, were masks and hand sanitizers. Some people started hoarding that as well. And some people may still have a plentiful supply tucked away somewhere.
I did hear that somebody had got 400 packets of toilet rolls in their loft.
Yes, which at any decent rate of requirement, 400 packets of toilet rolls could last quite a while. So this is one kind of reaction to what goes on. As I say, it's these are caricatures that are sort of a bit out there in terms of how people might react. But then, on the other hand, we have seen people who react in this way. So this is my earth person. My water person sees the threat and sees it as direct and immediate threat to themselves and their well-being. Now, the water neurotic who feels this threat will respond in terms of anger and aggression. And so when you look out of your window and you see that somebody's going for their second period of exercise of the day when there should be two, then anger may arise. And so we get a vigilante mentality that's going around looking to see whether somebody is wearing their mask, whether people are sanitizing their hands or whatever, and trying to lay down the law on people in some aggressive fashion. Now, it can also quite easily head in the other direction, because a person who is prone to feel threatened, prone to respond with anger, could be angry in different directions. So you could equally become angry at the feeling that the government is doing too much in terms of how it's restricting our movements. And we could become part of an angry protest against those restrictions as well. Could go either way. We can be angry in favor of the restrictions, or we could be angry in against them. But the consistent factor in both cases is we need to react with anger, one way or another. Possibly through angry protests, we gather together in groups, which helps the virus to spread, and then maybe out of that we get harsher lockdowns as a result. Then there's the fire element neurotic, is somebody who feels isolated. And the results of the pandemic are going to raise that as a distinct possibility for people, because isolation is part of the hoped for limit that we place on the transmission of the virus. So for somebody whose problem is already a sense of isolation, it's going to exacerbate that even more. So this could turn into needing to be with other people regardless, needing to be gregarious and congregate with other people, wanting to break the rules as far as being isolated or locked down are concerned. So these would be people who definitely would be opposed to the limitations placed upon them, or think they don't apply to themselves, or are currently desperate for the pubs to reopen so that they can go down there and spend some time with their friends. So this is the reaction of the fire element, needing to get over that isolation in some fashion. It can also result in severe bouts of online shopping. That would help, because an aspect of the fire element neurosis is this lust for stuff, and when we can't go out and shop for it, we can stay in and shop for it. So we have a regular parade of delivery vans running around, giving us this quick injection of consumerism. So that's another approach. The air element neurotic is the person who suffers from groundless anxiety in response to circumstances. So I've got these people labeled as conspiracy theorists, because when you're not sure what's going on and you feel the need to latch on to something or to find something, if you go looking hard enough, you're going to find something. So this is where we learn that the whole thing is a fake, that it's all done with regards to some sort of governmental control, or that the vaccinations include a microchip so that Bill Gates always knows where we are, or whatever it might be. But there's something out there that people aren't telling us. There's something fake about it, and you can tell that something's fake because when you don't find evidence for it, it's just proof that the cover-up is so complete that there must be something out there. So as I say, these are all caricatures of how people react. At the end of all that, if you get to the point where you've tried everything and nothing seems to work in terms of regaining any sense of security, then we will end up with a space neurosis, which is both the beginning and the end of everything. And the space neurosis is one of sheer bewilderment leading to depression. And so we're locked in, or we feel we have to stay in because everything out there is just too much and too confusing. So these are just some very short sketches of how different people might react to what is ostensibly the same situation. And knowing that different people react differently, I think enables us to take responsibility for our reactions, because none of those reactions are a given. If I'm a hoarder and you're a nervous anxiety person, given the same situation, I have to accept that I'm a hoarder because other people aren't hoarding.
That's a question.
Yes.
Now, a question from Peter. Do non-domesticated animals also have their emotional problems, or are they dwelling in non-duality? Can we actually tell?
This is an interesting question, because this also comes up in teachings on the 6 realms of being, and one of those realms is called the animal realm. Now, people ask whether animals are non-conceptual, whether animals are just fully present all the time. I think evidence would suggest that animals do have emotions. They do perceive problems, maybe differently to human perception, and that they do feel and react to things. If you've watched any nature programs, you'll see all sorts of reactions to circumstances in terms of fear, anger, desire. If you see what longhorn sheep do in the mating season, when they're attacking each other and thumping into each other with their great horns, then there's something there that's going on that looks remarkably like emotions that we're familiar with. So I'd say that although a field of sheep might look very peaceful, there's still an awful lot going on there in terms of emotional life.
Especially the black ones.
And the white ones also, yes. So, yeah, I would say it's not a given that animals, because they're not overtly emoting when we can see them, have transcended all of that. I think sometimes there's a tendency to put our particular twist on that perception, because we want to consider that animals maybe have something that we don't. But I think all realms of being have their problems, and that we should maybe have a series of teachings on the 6 realms at some point, and
let's do that next.
We can go into that in more detail. But I would say, unless somebody comes up with proof otherwise, I think animals all have their emotions as well. So those are my fairly quick and crude sketches of of what people have been doing as a result of the pandemic. But as we said fairly early on in this series, liberation is always possible. And I think this is one of the, I find one of the most important teachings of Buddhism, that there's neither original sin nor is there eternal damnation. There's actually original complete lack of sin, and there's the liberation that's always possible when you discover that your nature is pure from beginninglessness, and that everything we do in terms of our emotional life never gets us away from our beginningless enlightenment, however it seems. There's always something within our emotional problems that contain the seeds of undermining any activity that's based on that problem, but a clue as to the liberated quality of that particular element. And so I had a first thought of doing a series of crude vignettes of liberation. But what I found was that it's actually difficult to separate one form of liberation from another, because once you start liberating an emotion, all the other emotions will come with it. You can't just sort of, well, I'll keep those in a constricted fashion, and I'll just liberate this bit over here. It all comes together anyway. So any channel, any particular line that you take in terms of embracing emotions as the path of practice will include all of them automatically. So what we find, still with the picture of the virus hanging over our heads, is the reactions of many people have been in terms of generosity, clarity, connectedness, activity, and intelligence or wisdom. We've got a little shop in the village not far from here, and they turned around, it seemed almost in an instant, from being a shop you had to go in to one that offered deliveries. They just changed their approach to their business. Almost immediately there were restrictions, and they said, this is what we can do. Phone us up, say what we want, we'll bring it around. And then there are people in the locality who spend their time cooking so that they can actually deliver hot meals to people who can't go out, people who are self-isolating and shielding. So there's a sense in there of generosity and connectedness with our neighbors, people looking out for each other. This arises as well in response to circumstances. Now, not saying that the people who run our local shop are actually realized beings, but they haven't been hiding, or they haven't, their emotion, whatever their emotional problems might be, haven't been triggered in the way that the me project, this project of personal safety, takes precedence over everything else. They decided somewhere along the line that other people are just as important, and other people's needs need to be fulfilled, and they engaged in that. And that's been delightful to see wherever we've come across that sense of openness and kindness. And you find it on local bulletin boards as well. Anybody need anything? I've got a car, I'll go and fetch stuff. So it brings out the best in people, and we always have that choice that circumstances might trigger us to actually leave this me behind and engage with all the yous that are out there instead. Oh, we're back to sheep again. Um, so that was a quick run through, but I think in your own lives, wherever you are and whatever's going on and whatever the circumstances might be, you have your own emotional life, and you can see how that functions and what's possible in terms of the energies that arise, that may, if we grab hold of them, feed that constricted emotion, or if we have the possibility of liberating those emotions, what happens instead? So any questions at this point?
No.
No? Okay. That means it either makes no sense at all or it's perfectly clear. So, as we said last week, what we can do then is put the teachings to the test, because within Buddhism, there's nothing taken on faith particularly. So if somebody's sitting here going on about how this constricted emotion might mean this sort of liberation, or these elements give us a clue as to the patterns of our emotions, then it's good to test that out and see how that plays out in our lives. And so we can look at the nature of the elements, how earth is, how water is, how fire is. So as we said last week, you just study those, and wherever you happen to be, you can see what's solid, what's liquid, what's on fire, all of these things, and see how the elements behave. And then you can relate that to your personal experience of your own emotional life and see how these two play together. And this begins the process of just trying these things out to see whether these symbols and indications can be of help to you. Then there's the possibility of recognizing when we have an emotional reaction to something, what's going on there. I've often said to people, I didn't know I had a temper until we had children. So we are actually a minefield of emotional possibilities, because sometimes we have buttons that can be pushed and we didn't even know the button was there. And being ignored by children when you've got something dreadfully important to say, something can arise there, and it certainly did for me. And when that anger arises, there's something behind it that's fear. Fear of actually being obliterated, because if somebody is actively ignoring you, then it means that whatever you wanted to do, whatever you wanted to be in those circumstances has been extinguished and is under severe threat. So within that particular scenario, there was fear, there was a sense of threat, and the response was one of anger. And so in my case, I go, oh, I didn't know that was there. And the practitioner's response is, oh, thank you very much. I didn't know that was there. I can now attend to that. It might take years, but I will attend to it. So whenever we find that we have an emotional reaction to our circumstance, we could say, oh, thank you, circumstance. I didn't know that was there. And if we start to recognize what is the driving force behind that particular emotional reaction. So we have clues within the teachings. I'm hoarding stuff. I've got poverty mentality. Why have I got poverty mentality? And we can engage with whatever the driving force is behind that. We can then start to notice, perhaps earlier and earlier within the process of emoting, how that particular pattern arises and how it starts to play itself out. Now, we can start to see it. We can't necessarily stop it, perhaps as soon as we might like. So if you've ever had a problem with temper, for example, you can maybe start to notice when it's arising, but it carries on because there's a lot of momentum there. And this is also known as the hell of the practitioner, because we've taken responsibility for this thing. We can see it happening, and we haven't yet learned to let go or to liberate that particular series of possibilities. We might catch it sooner and sooner, but it has its own momentum because we've developed that momentum over time. But noticing and taking responsibility are part of this process of working with emotions and liberating our emotions. And then we also need to be suspicious of justification, because justification provides us with the platform from which to maintain the emotion. If we get angry and we also justify it, well, they did this. Anybody would be angry. Anybody would have this reaction. It's natural, obviously. This is justification, and it can happen in terms of any emotion, any negative reaction to anything. Anybody would do this. I'm quite within my rights. I'm doing it for your own good. Or whatever the justification might be. If we can start to tease away at that and remove that, then we loosen up the whole situation. But with that particular set of supports in place, it becomes very difficult. It becomes almost impossible to untangle the emotions because we're committed to it. We've invested in it. We've made a decision that that's a good idea. And what we are looking at as practitioners is taking total responsibility for our reactions to circumstances. This is actually entirely heroic because it goes against everything perhaps that we want to do and everything that everyone else is doing, apparently. So to take our particular reaction to circumstances and say, no, this is me, this is not the circumstances. There's nothing about the pandemic situation that means I have to be angry or whatever. That's out there. I'm over here doing this, and this is somehow a decision or a pattern that I've fallen into. And as Ngakpa Rinpoche once said, once we notice the pattern, it is a decision. If we know we have these patterns and we don't do anything about them, we've made a decision. So our heroic stance in the face of all this is we're going to take responsibility for these reactions until we've liberated them. So any questions at this point?
No.
Right, so we get on to the nub of the matter, assuming we have understood everything so far and that there's been a fairly logical progression in terms of these teachings and in terms of the expansion on emotions as being classified in terms of the five elements and how they all contain within them their own liberation, then we have a practice that we can engage in. And the practice is to stare into the face. This is the meditative practice, to stare into the face of the arising emotion. That is to say, within any emotion, I don't know about you, but it's true for me, there's a physical sensation. Nervousness might manifest as butterflies in the stomach, for example. Anger, I don't know where you'd find anger, maybe it'll be up in the chest, but whenever we feel an emotion, there's a sensation. So what we need to do at this point, it may not be convenient while you're out there in the world emoting, but on our meditation cushion, you find that sensation, and we drop any intellectual scaffolding, all of it, all together. Any thoughts about he did, she did, anyone would, gone. And we find the presence of our awareness in the sensation that's associated with the emotion, whatever that feeling is. So that thing that's going on in your stomach, that's fluttering away there it is. And that's where you find the presence of awareness. Then, having located it, you can allow it to expand. Allow that sensation to be all there is. Just that sensation. We're not talking about an emotion at this point. We're not talking about allowing anger or nervous anxiety to become everything. Just the sheer physical sensation of it. There's no sense of thought about it. It's just being present in that sensation. There's no observer. There's no me and it. There's no thought. There's just simple presence. And this is the practice that we engage in terms of Dzogchen and in terms of the emotion. What happens is that the energy liberates itself into its own condition because we're no longer constraining it. We're no longer thinking about it. We're no longer backing away from it, suppressing it, or abreacting as a result of it. It's just us, and it's just that sensation. Now, of course, when I first heard of this, I had this wild misinterpretation on the go. I thought, well, if I engage in this practice, I won't feel bad anymore. So whatever emotional badness I was feeling, right, I'm going to feel that feeling in order to not feel bad anymore. That was my particular misinterpretation. But the instructions for the practice don't contain a therefore at all. They just engage in this practice, find the sensation, find the presence of your awareness in the sensation, allow it to be all that there is, and remain there. And this, this relies to a great extent on your practice of silent sitting, your daily practice of meditation, because that gives us the opportunity to let go of habitual thought. If we engage in silent sitting every day, this is what we're practicing, so that we know how to become present and comfortable with emptiness. And so that practice gives us the ability to engage in the practice of finding the presence of awareness in the sensation without being overwhelmed by it, without being overwhelmed by what that might mean, because we're simply present with that sensation. So this is the practice in terms of Dzogchen. This is the most direct and immediate practice because there's no symbol intervening between us and the sensation that we might habitually associate with emotion. We're just present with that sensation. Now, as I say, this may not be something we find that we can engage in when we're out in the world. If we're angry with somebody when we're out in the world, it may not be possible to say, excuse me a minute, I just need to engage with this meditation practice. Although that might have quite an effect in terms of cutting the atmosphere and changing the direction of circumstances. But there are other aspects of practice from a Dzogchen point of view. And even though if we're not Dzogchenpas at any particular point in time, we in our lineage subscribe to the Dzogchen point of view. The practices of Sutra and Tantra are always available to us, depending on our level of awareness and our particular circumstances. So in terms of Tantra, here we have a symbol, and we have the symbol of the awareness being, and whichever awareness being you're most familiar with, whether it's Padmasambhava, Yeshitsogyo, Guji Trula, Chenrezi, Tara, whoever's practice you have the greatest familiarity with, in terms of arising as that awareness being, or if your practice is particularly to do with the external arising, then that can happen too, and you can gain inspiration from that. But within this lineage, we have the practice of dissolving one sense of oneself into emptiness, so we can re-arise as the awareness being. And in terms of the energy that would normally take us into a particular emotion, we arise as the awareness being, and we experience that energy in terms of that awareness being. Exactly how that is will depend on your own experience of the awareness being practice. But you can say from the very outset, well, Yeshitsogyo wouldn't act like that. But in terms of arising as Yeshitsogyo, arising as Guji Trula, the awareness being is a symbol of kindness and awareness given physical form. And so whatever activities are undertaken when you arise as that awareness being, have that as the basis. And then, as I say, there's also sutric practice is always available. And this might be the first one that comes to hand, I don't know. Because all of these work at different speeds, shall we say. And there's a bit more in terms of sutra, in terms of thinking about things, in terms of intellectual engagement. So if our emotional reaction begins with miserliness, begins with this feeling of hollowness and this need to hoard, to gather wealth, we can actually engage in an opponent practice of generosity. actually giving things that people need to them. Now, this isn't a suppressive practice, because one of the other surprises I had along the sort of Buddhist path is that I thought emotions were a bad thing and need to be kept down. But none of the practices within Buddhism have this suppressive approach to them. So we generate a sense of openness and kindness towards others, and then we can act from within that, that sphere. And generosity and kindness are our opponents, among a whole plethora of opponents, towards any sense of miserliness, towards any sense of aggression. It just changes the focus of what we're doing, so that we move away from this self-cherishing and move towards offering help to others. And as you can maybe see, all of these are entirely compatible with each other, because they all have this sense of kindness and awareness underlying them in terms of one's emotions. But which ones come to mind, or which ones come most readily to us at any particular time, will change. So we have all of these possibilities at our disposal at any time. So I'm coming to the end of what I had to say as far as these things are concerned. So I think mainly I just wanted to say that to engage with Buddhist practice and to get Buddhist answers to Buddhist questions is a heroic endeavor, because Buddhism looks at this is how it is. This is what our circumstances are, and doesn't engage with any kind of cotton wool fantasy about how things might be. So as Buddhist practitioners, we engage in whatever the circumstances happen to be, and we take full responsibility for how we are in that situation. And that means undermining ourselves. So a practice of meditation that involves letting go of thought, something as on the surface as simple as that, is the practice of undermining our addiction to thought, where thought is serving as a scaffolding for the sense of self. And this is quite possibly something we don't actually want to do. And so everyone is a hero or heroine who engages in meditation practice and who listens to Buddhist teachings and puts them into action by saying, yes, I'll take this on. I'll take responsibility for myself and my reaction to circumstances. So I guess I'd like to say you're all absolutely heroic in terms of engaging with these practices. So it's now coming up towards 5 to the hour. So we have some time left if anyone does have any questions on any of this. I'd be quite happy to answer any questions as best I can.
I have one question or comment whenever it's good to ask.
I can see that somebody's unmuted themselves, but I'm not hearing you. Let me check the speakers are on. Try again now.
Engage.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, we can
good.
hear you now.
Perfect. Hi. So my question is more like a comment. It very often feels like all this, like engaging with this practice is very difficult, and it's very hard to get like to be disappointed all the time, like the way you act and where you're not succeeding, and like it's very hard to get discouraged. Is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice or anything to say about that?
Sure. It's a good question. I think courage is part of it, as is humor and spaciousness, and also beginning with little things. We started this series of teachings on St. David's Day, and one of St. David's phrases was "do the little things," because it's success with the little things that enables us to create confidence in ourselves and in terms of practice. So little things like somebody who visits your house, or your partner or whomever leaves the toilet seat up. And this is a classic for irritation. But on the face of it, it's also fairly trivial. And we could work in terms of toilet seats and toothpaste tubes if we have an irritation issue of any sort. Work in little ways. If you would really like to sit in silent meditation for an hour, that could be the cause of great disappointment if you find an hour too hard. 5 minutes might be a good place to start. So within all these teachings, there's hopefully a little on-ramp, like coming onto a motorway or something, where we can get ourselves up to speed. Or to be honest, we could take the slow roads. That doesn't matter either. It's being on the path in any form and being patient with ourselves, because we're in this business for the sake of all sentient beings, and we're one of those sentient beings. So be as patient with yourself as you'd like to be with other people. Accept any failure with a sense of humor and grace, and think there'll be another chance along in a minute. There's always another opportunity for practice. What is it? Fall down 7 times, get up 8. We just continue in that fashion. So when we start out with any endeavor, whatever it is, and meditation and Buddhist practice is actually no different to anything else. If you pick up a musical instrument for the first time, you may not be able to get much out of it. But if you feel motivated towards learning about it, eventually you can play a tune on it. And meditation and Buddhist practice is the same. We start off with, in my case, misunderstanding about what you're supposed to be doing, gaining understanding and then failing miserably at what it is I'm supposed to be doing. So I used to have this idea with with silent sitting practice particularly, you're supposed to have no thought. Okay. I was given the advice, in order to help avoid thoughts, you can count up to 21 and back as a crutch, as it were. And then, being highly intellectual, I realized that counting is a thought. So I don't ever get as far as 1. I think, oh, it's a thought. I was thoroughly confused and entirely useless. when I did understand the practice, I didn't do it so well. There's thoughts everywhere. And it took me quite a long time to gain a sense of humor about it and not to actually feel frustrated. Sitting here for however long, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, overwhelmed with thought. Well, that didn't go very well, did it? But sitting there and eventually feeling, whose mind is it anyway? I'm sitting here, I'm telling my mind to have no thought, and it's doing its own thing. I have no control over this thing at all. And then there was a spark of humor in that. And that spark of humor always opens up a bit of spaciousness, and we can start to see ourselves. So whatever it is we're doing, or whatever it is we feel we're failing at, there can be some sense of humor around that, and a sense of perseverance and persistence. I've understood theoretically, this seems to be a good thing to do. I'm going to try it a little bit and see what happens. And then at some point, we may start to notice we're not quite the same person that embarked on this. Something happens, and you think, I used to get angry at that. And there's no anger anymore. The toilet seat, the toothpaste tube, whatever it might be, anything else begin with a T, it isn't there anymore. Something has changed. And that's just useful to notice how we've changed, because we don't tend to notice that. We just feel, oh, I'm just me bumbling along in this life. But then we notice that there's been something different. This person used to irritate me. They don't anymore. Have they changed? Have I changed? Does it matter? So I think you do have to have this sense of courage, and we always have to have a sense of failure, because unless we dwell in non-duality, there's still something to do. For all of us, there's still something to do. And even those who had a glimpse of non-duality have fallen out of it again, and they then go back to practice. So unless we have that realization, there's always something to do. And it's also good for those of us who have had some practice to remember that we began as somebody else. We began as with a struggle. We began with all these difficulties, whatever the practice might be. So perseverance and humor are the things I think I'd suggest.
May I say something?
Yes.
I think there wouldn't also be disappointment unless some awareness was starting to arise. So I think the fact that you feel disappointed that there's still emotion and you're not completely managing to liberate it is in itself a sign that you're practicing, because otherwise you just wouldn't notice it.
I think that is such a good thing, because when we were people blundering around unaware of the damage we were doing, you can be quite serene about that. Ignorance, they say, is bliss, and we can be quite serene in our ignorance of the problems we're causing. We engage in a path of practice, and it's going back to that phrase of it being the hell of a practitioner, because we know what's possible and we notice more stuff, and it feels like we're getting worse. But actually, as Ngakpa indicates, awareness is arising of how we've always been, and that can sometimes be a shock and a disappointment. But it is that sense, absolutely, of a rising awareness and something to go, yep, I'm noticing this stuff now.
So we've run out of time.
We have run out of time.
Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for your kind attention and for coming to this set of teachings. If you have missed any, or you should want to listen to them again, they are on the recordings are on the oh God, I have recorded, yes. The recordings are on the Arrowling Cardiff YouTube channel. And there's a set of playlists there, so you can just look for the playlist called Liberating Emotions and you will find it there. So we haven't made a decision about what the next set of teachings will be. I think it's my turn next. So at some point we will decide and advertise what our next set of teachings. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.